Hi, my name is Garrett McCullough. I am a current master's student in the Masters of Accountancy program at SUU. I'm also a current student of Professor Stillman's in his Managing Organizations and People class. When I mention the name James McNerney, what initially comes to your mind? If you're anything like me as of 3 weeks ago, probably nothing. However, if I mention the name Boeing, then that's a whole other story. James McNerney is most well known for his current position as CEO at the Boeing Company, and he's been in this position since July 1st of 2005. James became CEO of the Boeing Company during a very rocky time in its history. If you know anything about Boeing's past, then you know that pre-2005, this massive company was struggling from a string of corporate scandals which had cost the company billions in lost government contracts and left its future in limbo. Mr. McNerney is given the credit for pulling the company out of an extreme nosedive. We're going to look at some of the key characteristics that James McNerney possesses that enabled him to do this, and we will talk some more about his role at Boeing a little later on, because I feel like this is the most influential role that he has held as of yet in his career. Now, it's no doubt that James's youth was the training ground for the positions that he would later hold in life. Walter James McNerney Jr. was born in 1949 in Providence, Rhode Island, but he spent the majority of his youth in Winnetka, Illinois. He was the oldest of 5 children. He had 3 brothers and 1 sister. James's siblings all agree that out of all the children, James is most like his father. James's parents were both strong role models for him and his siblings, and they were both well educated. Shirley, James's mother, graduated from Vassar College in New York, but eventually became a stay-at-home mom raising the children. Walter James McNerney Sr. was a professor of health policy and successful businessman. He often exposed his children to business by introducing them to his traveling business associates, and he often liked to see if his kids could carry on conversations with his associates. Whether the kids liked it or not, he tended to be a professor at home as well as on campus. James's brother Dan recalls many memories at the dinner table where Walter would bring up many current issues and ask, "What do you think, and why do you think it?" Walter himself was a very influential person, not only to James, but even nationwide. During the late 1950s, Walter had founded and was head of the hospital administration program at the University of Michigan and had performed many studies at the university concerning the difficulties of the poor and elderly in obtaining proper health care. Later, he became the president of the Blue Cross Association, and he eventually oversaw the merging of the 2 companies to eventually form Blue Cross Blue Shield. By using his studies at the University of Michigan, he helped form the Medicaid and Medicare programs under President Lyndon B. Johnson. In the home, James's father taught the importance of ethics to the children. He was a huge supporter of public service and discouraged self-promotion among the kids. During his youth, James's family was actively involved in the Presbyterian faith. They often spent summers at their grandparents' in Duxbury, Massachusetts, and it was here that they learned the value of hard work. They were often clearing trees off of their grandparents' property and pulling the stumps out. The McNerney family was also huge into sports, and James himself was involved in several. During high school at New Trier High School, James played center in hockey, center in basketball, and he was also pitcher for the baseball team. His siblings also always liked to give him a hard time during high school, saying the only reason why he wanted to be the pitcher was so that he could be in control, as usual. But after graduating high school, James went on to play baseball at Yale University, right alongside future President George W. Bush. After receiving his bachelor's in American Studies, it seems that James had spent a couple years trying to find himself. I found this period in James's life to be interesting. He had tried just about everything from being a ranch hand in Colorado to teaching sailing lessons on Lake Michigan, and also worked at an insurance company in London, England. But he eventually decided that he needed to go back to school, and so he did so and received his MBA at Harvard University. Upon graduating, James landed a job at Procter & Gamble as a brand manager, and it was there that he oversaw several household products. You probably recognize several of them, including Coast Soap, Bounce Fabric Softener Sheets, and Downy Liquid Fabric Softener. After 2 years at Procter & Gamble, he joined a consulting firm called McKinsey & Company. However, it was his next position that was extremely helpful towards him and his career. He was hired on at GE in 1982 as Vice President of GE Information Services. Throughout the next 6 years, James McNerney held several high-level executive positions in different divisions of GE before returning to the Information Services Division as President in 1988. And GE was a great training ground for James McNerney. Part of that was due to their own leadership program that they have at GE, which the typical procedure was to move promising manager prospects around to different divisions every 2 to 3 years so that they could gain invaluable manager experience and eventually move up the ranks. One of the most noteworthy accomplishments that I saw for James when he was at GE was when he was sent out to head up the Asia branch of GE in 1992. Jack Welch, GE's CEO at the time, says that he had sent James there without much more than a briefcase. In Welch's own terms, the business was negligible when James went there, but it was up to James to find a way to make it grow. While there, he did see substantial growth in the Asia branch, and it was also there that in Asia that he learned about the aerospace industry and was involved in key GE airplane engine sales campaigns. Eventually, James returned to the States and became president of GE's Aircraft Engines Division in Cincinnati, Ohio. This is where he developed a truly deep passion for flight, and it was under his leadership that the GE Aircraft Engines Division became the #1 division in the aerospace industry. Part of the reason was the huge win that McNerney had made by landing a contract to provide Boeing with the GE90 engine for its 777 jet. James was eventually able to turn the Aircraft Engines Division into the second most profitable division in GE. During his watch, sales at the Aircraft Engine Division had increased annually from $6.3 billion to $11 billion. Because of his performance at GE Engines, James was in the running for taking over Jack Welch's spot as CEO. Welch had been following closely the career of 3 contenders within GE's main divisions. However, eventually Mr. Welch decided to give the position to one of James's contenders, Jeff Immelt. James describes this experience as the biggest disappointment of his career. However, I found it pretty interesting because in interviews he talked about how he dwelt on the fact for about a day and then just decided he was going to move on. Pretty amazing that he was able to do that. And of course, it wasn't all doom and gloom because with the positions that he had held at GE, he was highly sought after by other companies. In fact, within 1 week of losing the race for GE's CEO position, he was named CEO of the company 3M, whose main products are consumer and industrial tapes and abrasives. Now, this was an out of the ordinary move for 3M, seeing as how it's the first time that they had hired an outsider to fill one of their executive positions. However, he did not disappoint them. At 3M, he was able to improve their manufacturing processes and increase sales and stock growth by 30%. While at 3M, James served on the board of directors for the Boeing company. And during this time, Boeing had offered their CEO position to James on 2 occasions. during which he refused both times, saying he was happy where he was at. However, in the spring of 2015, James really started to second guess his decision and eventually decided that that's what he did want, was to join the Boeing company. Now, James knew that he was fighting an uphill battle by joining Boeing. As was mentioned earlier, the company had undergone a string of executive scandals that had cost the company dearly. In July of 2005, Boeing named James McNerney as their new CEO. And at that time, Boeing knew that they needed much more from Mr. McNerney than making normal management decisions and overseeing the day-to-day operations of the company. They knew that they needed a complete ethics culture overhaul. In 2003, Boeing had been caught with the rival company's confidential documents. They had received the documents after hiring a rival company's former employee from Lockheed Martin. They eventually used these documents to underbid Lockheed Martin for a government contract and were eventually caught. Later in 2003, illegal agreements between Boeing's chief financial officer, Michael Sears, and the Air Force's top procurement official came to light, and this resulted in Michael Sears being fired and serving prison time. This same scandal also led to the early resignation of Boeing's CEO at the time, Phil Condit. Harry Stonecipher, Mr. Condit's replacement, had only made it 18 months before an inter-office affair led to his resignation. As a result of the Air Force scandals, the company agreed to pay $600 million in penalties to the government, the largest ever in U.S. history. Boeing also lost a $25 billion 10-year contract, which was eventually later reinstated. James McNerney could easily see the need for a revamping of the company's ethical culture. Following the $600 million penalty, James and his closest council members voted against taking a tax write-off that would have saved the company $200 million. He knew that more than making money, he needed to instill trust in the promise that they had made for ethical change. At the company's first management retreat since being put in office, James agreed to have the general counsel start off the meeting by showing the prison numbers of former scandal executives. After putting the numbers on the board, he started off the meeting as saying, "These are not zip codes. These are prison numbers for previous executives." He was trying to hit home that Boeing had to make some very drastic changes in their culture in order to be able to keep the company going. One of the first steps James took was then to start an ethics program. A year after becoming CEO, he was summoned to the Senate office where he apologized to the Senate Armed Services Committee for Boeing's past decisions and promised, among other things, that an ethics program that would hopefully become Boeing's legacy in the future. One thing that I found interesting is that Boeing's current executives' pay and bonuses are intricately linked to the executives living the ethics program's values. 20 months after being put in office, James McNerney was able to land Boeing in the number 26 spot on the Fortune 500 list, and he created a 43% rise in Boeing's share price. However, probably one of the most exciting breakthroughs since James McNerney became CEO was the creation of the 787 Dreamliner. The reason why this aircraft was so revolutionary is because 50% of the aircraft's makeup was carbon fiber instead of the usual aluminum. This allowed for it to be extremely lightweight and allowed for it to be 20% more efficient than usual. Due to James McNerney's presence, Boeing has smashed some of its own records as far as sales prior to the 2005 scandals. Although his management experience and leadership skills had enabled him to make necessary decisions to take the lead of the company, perhaps the qualities that made the most impact were the ethics that he learned at home and at the family dinner table. Thanks.